Hello, IX ambassadors. I hope you're all doing well. I also hope that you can hear me because I think you can. So the first person who joins, let me know that you can hear me. I'm going to keep talking and assume you can. Okay, let's see. What do we have for announcements? I feel like I haven't been on this for a while, but maybe it was just last week. No, that was Bob. Gosh, yeah, it's been a while since I've been on the live. Doing well. I've been really busy traveling a lot this month, speaking and training. As you can see, I was in Florida, and if you couldn't tell from the sunburn in the marks on my face, you can certainly tell by the hair doodle I have. So the girls and I got these, braids. I guess that's what they are. I see someone just joined. Lynn, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, so Lynn's going to give us a thumbs up if she can hear. So I was in Florida last week. Spoke to a group there. Rachel's in Las Vegas right now at a Hero Club event. Oh gosh, we've just been all over like crazy. What other announcements do we have to make? SDCEO Women's Business Conference in Aberdeen is next week on Friday. They have a few spots open, like maybe 10. I think they're almost full. I'm keynoting that event, so if you're on the eastern side of the state and you are, well, a human, but a female probably, looking for a great day of leadership development and new ideas and networking, then you should certainly attend that event. Again, that's next Friday in Aberdeen at the Best Western. You can check out SDCEO's website or Facebook page, which is, well, you can Google it. It's SDCEO, I'm sure, Facebook.com/SDCEO. So let's see, let me make sure there are no other announcements to be made. I don't think so. So today we're talking about, or this week, we're talking about change and that it's hard. Just kidding, that it's not hard, that we make it hard. It can feel really hard, and sometimes it's a challenge, but it doesn't actually have to be as hard as we make it. And I guess we should start with, why do we make change hard? Why do we make it seem like it's so much harder than it really is? But before we even start with that, I'm going to start with, how do we know that it isn't as hard as we all think it is? Well, go through this exercise in your head. Think about some big change that you've gone through in your life, like a big one, like the biggest one you can think of. Maybe getting married, someone important to you passing away, maybe going off to college or moving to another place, the birth of a child, maybe is something in the way you eat or exercise. Think about the biggest change that you've ever gone through in your life. And then think about all of the pain that you thought you went through during that change. Now, think about the moment that it was getting close to all being over, kind of leveling out, and you thought to yourself, why did I cry so many tears or lose so many pounds or gain so many pounds over that silly event? Like, it was a big deal, but in hindsight, I worried about stuff that didn't matter. Think about that moment. That moment happens in every change. After the change or somewhere towards the end, we think to ourselves, oh my gosh, why was I so stressed about that? That was kind of silly. That's how we know that change isn't as hard as we make it. Because we always think to ourselves afterwards, that really wasn't that bad, or I could go through that again. I don't want to, but I could. Or I'm really excited I had that challenge because now I know how to deal with that kind of change. So, change isn't hard, and that's the test you can use to make sure, to remind yourself that it's not that hard. It can be challenging, but you can handle it. So, how how do we make sure that change isn't that hard then? And why do we make it seem like it is? Well, we make it seem like it is because our emotions, our reptilian brain, runs away with everything, frankly. That's the way our brain is designed. So we start out with our instincts. And when things change, if you think clear back to caveman times when the brain was first starting to be formed, or whatever evolutionary story you believe in, you think back to the first humans and their instincts. Instincts all start with emotions. And so as soon as a change happens, your emotions start. That is the way your brain is designed. You can't get around it unless you train your brain to short circuit that behavior. And so our emotions take off and they start thinking about all these crazy things, and they what if the situation to death, and they apocalypse scenario the thing to death. Right? Like, oh my God, end of the world planning. So once we train our brains to not worry about that stuff so much and use some of the tools that we're familiar with, we have a better opportunity to think about how exactly things need to happen so that we can process a change well and get through a change well. So one of the tools that we use for this is the experience cube. The experience cube separates out logic from emotions and feelings, and it gives you an opportunity to really think about all of those different parts. There's 4 different parts: observations, thoughts, feelings, and wants. And so between those 4 different parts, and when you separate them out and compartmentalize them, now we don't just say throw out the thoughts and feelings because that's silly and why would you worry about that. We say no, they're there and there's nothing you can do about it, so we may as well give them the space and time to breathe, and then we can set them aside over here and we can go back to the logic pieces and just make a decision. So when you have that opportunity, you put the thoughts and the feelings, those buckets, over where they belong, and then you can think about the observations and the wants. So what do you know is going on right now, and what do you want to have happen? What sort of results are you seeking in this situation? So let's go through a scenario that's in the experience cube. That's one that you haven't brought on yourself, a change you haven't brought on yourself. Those are the ones that usually get us off. So we all know about culture types. There's fixer, independent, stabilizer, and organizer. And we all know that those different culture types have a different propensity for order and chaos, and being team-driven and being self-driven. But even though fixers and independents can handle more chaos and actually prefer it to some extent, they don't love it if there's too much, or if it goes on too long, or if they're not the ones that started the change or the chaos. So let's think of a scenario where there's been a change and you didn't start the change or initiate it. Let's say there's going to be a RIF in your organization, reduction in force. So they're laying people off. And you don't yet know if you're one of those people, but you know for sure some of the people that might work for you or alongside you are on the list. So what's the observable data? Well, there's a layoff, and people are going to be leaving. We probably know the end date, so people are probably going to be leaving within the next 2 weeks or maybe by the end of the day. And we know that the workload is, let's say we know that they have told us the workload is not going to decrease. Or said in other words, the business is not going under. They're doing a reduction in force just because they think they don't need all those people. So a reduction in force, getting rid of some people by a certain time that we know about, and the workload is not going to change. So those are the things we know. So that goes in that observable data bucket. But what happens when we hear this? I can just imagine, for those of you who are listening, you're thinking to yourselves right now, like there's a little tiny bit of extra flutter in your heart, and you're thinking, oh my God, this is not even happening to me in real time, and it's making me feel nervous. Right? That's because your brain's already taking off. And what's it thinking about? It's thinking, is my name on the list? Is my name not on the list? Is my best friend's name on the list? Is the guy who I don't like down the hall, is his name on the list? I wonder when they're all going to leave. Is it actually going to be in 2 weeks, or are they going to make them leave sooner, or are they going to make them leave later? I wonder if we're going to have to get new software. I'll bet you I'm going to have to make sure that I do some of that work and cover for the people that are leaving. I wonder if they're going to pay us more because we're going to have to work more. Oh man, I wonder if they're going to expect us to work a lot more. And I don't know who's going to get my kids on Wednesday afternoon when they get out of school. And on and on and on. Those things are what our brains perceive as reality. Those assumptions or thoughts that belong in the thought bucket. That's where our brain starts. It doesn't start with that observable data that says, there's a rift, we know some people are leaving by a certain date, and that the workload's not going to change. Those are the only things we actually know. And if you think about those things, instead of all of these things in that assumption bucket, this seems still challenging, but not so hard to be thinking about or worrying about. So that's the difference between observable data and thoughts or assumptions. So in one bucket, you want to write down your observations. In another bucket, or you put the crosshairs, create a matrix on your blank piece of paper, put observations in one bucket, and start your thoughts in another bucket. What are all the things you think? What are all the things you assume? The thing I would tell you is make sure you write down all the stuff that you think is crazy scary, or if it's a situation where maybe someone is not, maybe they have poor attendance at work and you're their supervisor, or maybe you're working with a colleague and they are just being super difficult and you think you really know why it is. Let's say you think that person is an alcoholic and you have no idea, you have no way to prove it, but that is your assumption, is that they are an alcoholic and that's why they're really difficult to work with. Put that in the assumptions bucket or the thoughts bucket. Write it down. You don't want to write it down. It's an ugly thought. You want to pretend like you hadn't even thought it. But you did, and so you need to write it down. That's how you release yourself from those thoughts. So those are your observations. Now, one thing that we get a little bit caught up in is mistaking thoughts for feelings. Feelings are things like anxiety, frustration, happiness, excitedness, craziness. Those are feelings. Those are not thoughts. And a lot of times we hide behind the word feel when we want to talk about our thoughts, because it's a lot harder for another person to attack us if we say I feel like instead of saying I think that, because it's a lot less likely that a human being is going to attack another human being or disagree with, attack's a little heavy, disagree with, or start a conflict with someone if they say, well, I feel like you're really getting after me for no reason. If you say, listen, I think that you are attacking me and I don't like it, that sounds different than I feel like. So we hide behind the word feel a lot. That's why it's hard to separate out thoughts and feelings, but it's really important that we do that and talk about, even just with ourselves in this exercise, talk about what those feelings are. Again, just like the thoughts, until you write them down, say them out loud, you can't let them go. So in the next bucket or in the next section in the corner, write down what are your feelings. So we know there's a rift. We know a certain amount of people are leaving. We don't know if we're on the list, but we know some people that we work with are on the list. We know they're going to be leaving at a certain time, and we know that the workload's not going to change. We think all of those things that we talked about just earlier. And what does that make us feel like? Well, probably it makes us feel super anxious. If we really are not loving our job, it might make us feel a little bit excited because we're like, oh my gosh, if my name's on the list, then maybe I'll have an opportunity to go do something else and I don't have to quit my job. Or maybe you're thinking, I really love it here and I want to stay here, and but I've been bored, and so this is an opportunity for me to take on some more work or maybe be innovative or have a new project. So those are probably some of the feelings you're feeling and we'll write down in your feelings bucket. The next section is wants. Now, it's really easy for us to think that we couldn't have any requests or wants or goals when a change has been put into our lives without us asking for it. But you can, and actually that's how you create some sanity for yourself when you are going through a change, and it makes it feel more like a challenge and less like the hardest thing on the planet. So what do you want? I mean, you want to keep your job? Do you want to start looking for something else? Do you want to go ask questions of your supervisor? Do you want to start working on your resume? What are the things that you could possibly want? Now, this all sounds silly, but I just said two very different things, and it would lead to two very, very different, or lead you down two very different paths. So it could be that you want to go ask questions of your boss, get some clarification, and find out how it's going to impact your work, and let him or her know that you have every intention of staying if you are staying, and that you want some new challenges. So it could be that. Or it could be that you're like, oh my gosh, maybe this is my out. Maybe even if I'm not invited to leave, I go anyways because I haven't really felt challenged here or welcome, or this isn't the place for me. So I'm going to start working on my resume and seeing what other opportunities are out there. And so if you think about the things that you want to have happen from this situation, even if you can't control the situation as a whole, you can't make the rift go away. You can't run screaming hair on fire into your boss's office or into the CEO's office and say, oh my gosh, you're making a horrible mistake. We'll never get all this work done. Blah, blah, blah. You can't let these people go. They're good people. That's not going to do any good. And you're not going to do that. So you can't manage that. And it's important then to think about the things you can manage and what outcomes do you want for yourself. Then you know what you can start working towards. And if you have something to focus on, it gives you an opportunity to not be focused on all those thoughts and feelings or assumptions that you have of anxiety and worrying about stuff that you can't even manage right now or think about. So that's how the experience cube works. And that's a scenario that all of us can, even if you're not familiar with it or never have had to worry about being challenged with it, you can think about it and think, man, if somebody walked into my office right now today and said, you're out of here, or three people next to you are out of here, that would bring up some serious feels. And what would those feels be? And how do you account for those and the thoughts that go along with them? And then how do you actually make some sense out of it? So if you use the experience cube to walk yourself through this situation, then it really takes out a lot of that emotional heartache. It doesn't make it less of a challenge necessarily, but it makes it feel like something you can handle. And that's really the mindset transition from, oh my gosh, change is just hard. This is how it is. We just all have to grin and bear it. We'll just have to gut it out. It changes from that mindset to, okay, well, what opportunities are there here? What do I want? What does this new thing look like? So that's one tool. Another tool is to simply understand is the Kurt's change transition model, and that helps us simply understand what exactly happens during a change. What is the process of a change? Because as we all know, the unknown is the most scary part of a change, right? If somebody came in, even if you weren't an information or order tolerant person, if somebody came in and gave you all the details for a change, you'd still feel anxious, but you would at least be like, well, at least I know exactly what's going to happen. So it's really the unknown, and a lot of times we don't get enough, what we feel is enough information to process the change. But if you understand the process of how change works, that it helps you get through the points at which you don't think you have enough information, or you feel uneasy because there are lots of unknowns for you. And so all the stuff that we'll talk about now here for the next bit is in the second section of the book. And it's all about the Kurt's change transition model and how the 4 different culture types actually process change and get through the change, get through a change. So in the Kurt's change transition model, you're going along and your life is pretty normal and nothing crazy is happening. And then all of a sudden your company is laying off 25 people. And even if you're being laid off, you don't really think about it for a while. Maybe you just think, well, You just almost might, it's like being in denial. You just don't think about it. Or it hasn't, a lot of people, the way a lot of people talk about it is, yeah, I guess it just hasn't really hit me yet. So your brain hasn't processed what in the world just happened. And that's called decline. You're in decline, you're in denial. Your brain is not really processing the reality of it. But at some point, you have to let go. And when you let go, you're letting go of the old. So you had a job, um, or you worked with these certain people, and now you don't. And so, what does that new thing look like? So then once you let go, you go into what we call innovation phase. And innovation phase is the point at which, and it's a big portion of the change process. And you all over your energy levels skyrocket and then they plummet, skyrocket and plummet, depending on your culture type. Sometimes the peaks and valleys are really high if you're chaos tolerant, and if you're order tolerant, they're not quite so high. But during innovation phases, when you really might have lots of new ideas and think about lots of crazy things, you might think, I'm going to move to Europe. And you might think, I'm going to move closer to home where I grew up. Or you might think, I'm just going to go into a whole new industry. Or I might go back to school. Or maybe I won't work for a while. So your brain could think about all different kinds of things when you're in innovation phase. An interesting point about the innovation phase before we move on, from an organizational perspective, a lot of times an organization, because we have sort of tied ourselves to this idea that change is hard and we just have to grin and bear it and gut it out and get through it. Because we've thought that way for so long, innovation phase is really squelched. Because companies say, well, I don't want to hear this new idea. Nope, we're doing this thing. Oh, nope, that's just how it's going to be. And they don't necessarily listen for the new ideas that people have. And so we, generally speaking, as a business world, we don't utilize the opportunities that exist in a change environment in that innovation phase. And that's really one of the major reasons why Rachel and I decided to write the book and design all of the stuff that we did, because we want to help the business world make good use of that energy instead of squandering it on the excuse that change is hard. So in innovation phase, all kinds of crazy ideas might come out. And some days feel like this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And some days feel like, oh my gosh, if I could take it all back, I would. And then eventually you get into your new normal. Now, sometimes we all like to think that our new normal goes up and better, higher energy, better experience than our previous experience. But sometimes that's not the case. And I'm sure you've all either been at a point in your life or known someone who didn't really let go of what was happening. Like they might have said they did, but they didn't let go of it. They never quite got over it. Then they sort of went through innovation phase, but they were really cynical and kind of cranky about whatever the change was, and didn't seem to ever, again, let go of some of the stuff that they're still frustrated about. And they never worked through that. And so sometimes the new normal in those situations, whether it's for you or someone else, or it can even be for an entire organization, the new normal has lower energy than the energy that was before the change. And quite often, that's when we get called in to do culture triage for organizations, is when they've implemented a change, it hasn't gone well, people didn't accept it because it wasn't managed well, and expectations weren't managed well, and people weren't led through the change, and then the new normal within the whole organization is lower. This usually results in really high turnover, really, really low morale and engagement, a lot of backbiting, a lot of eye-rolling water cooler talk, low performance. And so those are the things, everybody can sustain in a less desirable environment for a while, but people will not stay there forever, whether it's a group of people or an individual. None of us will stay in an environment that doesn't suit us for very long. For some people, order intolerant people, it might be longer. An order tolerant person, a stabilizer or an organizer, might stay in an organization that didn't manage a change well for a year or 2 years or even 10 years. But eventually they'll probably find a new place to go. Chaos tolerant people, more and more of those, it seems like all of the time with the way the fast pace of the world today. And those folks, they just won't tolerate poorly managed change or a lack of culture or bad leadership. They'll go find what they're looking for somewhere else. And so you want to really focus on what that new normal looks like as an organization, or if you're an individual, what are the goals that you have? What, again, going back to that experience cube, what do you want to have happen? Even if it's a situation that you have not created or started, what do you desire? What are the results that you want to see in a week, 2 weeks, 3 months, a year? And it's really important to focus on those things so that your new norm and your energy is higher than it was, or at least level with the energy you had before the change. So if change is done well within an organization, then that whole Kurt's change transition model is really shrunk down for all 4 of the culture types. So even those order tolerant folks who really, they want lots of information, they want to understand what's going on, why is the change happening, who's it going to impact, when's it going to happen, how long can we expect there to be a ripple effect from this, what does that ripple effect look like, how many other ripples is that going to cause? Those folks want a lot of information, but you can even shorten the time that they take to process change if you do it well. So change managed well. I don't have my book with me, so sorry, otherwise I'd tell you that this is all in the second section, and there's graphs that go along with each one of the culture types and how they process change, and it shows guided, well-guided, and unguided, and what are the differences between the two. So for fixers and independents, their innovation swings are a lot more wild because no one's managing their expectations or helping guide them through all of the crazy ideas they're having. So if they're not guided well through change, their innovation phase is just all over the place. So they might go from, this is the best opportunity I've ever had. We're still on the RIF scenario. And let's say that you're on the list for ease of conversation. Let's say you're on the list, and so you're going to be done in 2 weeks, right? And so fixers and independents, if that's not managed well, the whole process of change, you might go from, this is the best new opportunity I could ever possibly have. I can get out of this company and not feel guilty for quitting, or like I failed, or like I got bored, or whatever, to, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do without this job. This is ridiculous. I don't have enough money in savings. What if I can't find another job? So those innovation peaks and valleys can be pretty wild swings if it's not managed well. Now, they'll still be way higher than organizers and stabilizers, even if the change is managed well. So they'll be higher and lower energy in that innovation phase than the order tolerant folks, but they won't be as high because they'll know if you manage change well for a fixer or an independent, you allow them enough scope that they understand certainly what is not included, so that they can develop what that looks like. So you give them enough freedom to kind of develop their own thoughts about what's going on, but you give them enough scope so they know not to go color too far out of the lines, if you will. Okay, so the organizers and stabilizers, they like a lot of information. So they like information, and they really prefer order. And so any kind of a change at all is not necessarily desirable for those people. Because of that, their decline phase is longer. Even if change is managed well and guided well, their decline phase is a little bit longer. So it takes a little bit longer to get to that let go so they can start thinking about what the new normal is going to look like after the innovation phase. The nice thing about organizers and stabilizers, when you manage a change well, is that they'll take the time up front to think about what everything's going to look like. So once they get to that let go phase, which will take less time if you manage it well, it'll take them a little bit less time to get to that let go phase. And when they get there, their innovation phase won't be really wild and crazy. It'll probably be pretty condensed. Their energy is pretty level. And then they get to the new norm pretty quickly because they've already used all of that information up front to develop what they think is probably the best solution with this change happening. And so up front, an organizer or stabilizer who's been laid off is going to freak out in their brain, probably especially an organizer, probably to themselves or maybe one or two important people in their life. And they're going to think, oh my gosh, I can't handle this. I don't know what I'm going to do. And all the things are going to go through their head. And then they're going to start making a list. They're going to have a list of questions. They're going to have a list of, things about their personal finances. They're going to have a list of, who knows, all kinds of lists about all the important things, all the information. And then as they start getting those lists organized and those questions answered and the checkbox is checked, they start to calm down a lot more, and then they've let go, and then they go through innovation phase, which they don't need to make too big of a deal about because they've already got it pretty well sorted out, and then they get into new normal. When you're doing when you have a big change in an organization, if you manage it well, your stabilizers and organizers are a great resource because they're very thorough and they're very keen on what's going on and how things are being impacted and how people are being impacted. And then once they get through to the new normal, if you've done it well, once they get to the new normal, they're really well adjusted and they go right back to working. Fixers and independents are the same. They're just a little bit more wild to manage because they like a little bit of freedom. So it's just a difference, not good, bad, or otherwise. So let's get to some of the questions today. How can I tell if a job will have the right amount of change for me? Well, I would say first know your culture type, obviously. Then you'll know what your propensity for, your appetite for change is, or chaos, really. Because change creates some amount of chaos or challenge or something different. So I'd say know your culture type first. If you're above the line, what we call above the line, so if you're chaos tolerant, I would say you want to look for a job, or at least an industry, or a job in an industry that's got some differences in the day-to-day work. So it's not the same thing every day. I mean, there are going to be, no matter what your job is, there are going to be things that are the same from day to day. But I would say if you're above the line, you may not want to be a manufacturing employee where your job is to stamp something every day without much thought. That job would drive you nuts. There's not enough change in that job. Now, let's say you want to work in the manufacturing industry and you want an opportunity to be innovative or at least have some difference in your differences day to day. Maybe you want to work on the some sort of innovation team or business development or engineering. Or maybe if you're working within the factory itself, you're not going to do the stamper job, but maybe you're going to do the job where the stamps are designed or repaired or switched out or something like that. I don't know. But I think that's the very first thing you need to do is check and see what your culture type is. And then look at the job description. And if it sort of makes you cringe, don't do it. I don't care what your culture type is. I have looked at so many job descriptions and thought to either for myself or reviewing them for someone else or to hire someone else. And I thought, I wouldn't want to do that. If you have a thought like that about really anything on the job description, but for sure, like the first 5 skills or job requirements, pass. You're not going to love it. You're not even going to like it for long enough to keep the job. So don't fool yourself. Don't waste your time. Move on. The right opportunity will come. I promise you. So once you've looked at the job description and you know your culture type and you think you have a pretty good idea of what's what, I would find some people who work at that place. Chances are you're going to have an interview. And when you do have that interview, ask people what they like about working there. Ask them what they don't like about working there. Ask them enough questions that you might sort of figure out what you think, which culture type they are, if they like change or not, if they like teams or not, and then find out what are the things that they like and don't like about working at that place or in that industry. And then you'll have a better idea of what sort of an environment you'll be working in. One of the questions I would ask is, can I expect there to be a lot of change in the environment? I really like change, and so I want to know more about that. Or I don't really love change, but I know how to process it, and I'd like to just be ready for that. That way you just know. You can tell by people's faces if they're telling you the truth or not. Okay, next question. I'm an independent. How can I integrate change into my work life? How can I help others handle change better? This is a good one. And frankly, I'm an independent, but this fixer question is good. Because this is a question I struggle. This is an issue I struggle with all the time. I'm a fixer. How can I help others handle change better? I have no idea. I'm just kidding. It really is a challenge when you are chaos tolerant and working through a change with people who are order tolerant. Not because they're a challenge, because their perspective is a lot different than yours as someone who's chaos tolerant, and it just doesn't make any sense. And there's no way really to explain why someone who's order tolerant has to ask all those questions. So I think as a fixer, the best thing you can do is a favor, not only to the folks that you're working with who might be order tolerant, but really to yourself too, is to find out what their questions are. You can see in their eyes if it's to stop a meeting or ask a question that you don't even have. A lot of times, if I'm in a group of people and I know that I can look around, well, before when I was an HR manager, I would look around and I would know exactly which questions were in people's minds that they would never ask because they weren't comfortable. They'd rather go away and stew on it and then gossip with other people that they worked with and make up their own solution, as opposed to asking the question. So I would ask the questions that I knew were going to be asked, even if I didn't have the question. So in the example of there being reduction in force, you would know that if they hadn't mentioned it yet, let's say they haven't mentioned it yet, everybody's wondering when we will know who's on the list. Yeah, we'll say, when will we know who's on the list? So I just raise my hand and say, when will we know who's on the list? So I think that's really the best thing you can do to help an order tolerant person or group of people feel more comfortable with change. When you're like, oh, well, I guess, okay, let's move on. I mean, that's not exactly your reaction, I'm sure, but most of the time, chaos tolerant people just don't think about those questions. And sometimes it's to your demise because there's a lot of questions very often that should be asked that we don't ask. But if you're really in tune with the group and if you're really in tune with the group and you know what questions are going to be asked, just ask them for those people. That helps them a lot. Gather the information that they need so they can start to make decisions about how they're going to get through the change. The other thing I would say is show them the Kurt's change transition model if they're not familiar with it, and have them take the culture type assessment. Because chances are, if they know a little bit more about how that process is going to go for them, they'll feel more comfortable. Otherwise, we wouldn't actually be doing what we do. So of course that would work. Okay. Well, I think that's about it for today. We're about to the 40-minute time limit. If you have any questions about change, how it works, or want any more information about any of the other topics that we cover, certainly let us know. Rachel and I think next week we'll actually both be in the same place, so we'll probably both be on here next week. So have a great rest of your week. Enjoy. I don't know where you all are living, but wherever you are, I hope the sun is shining like it is here. And if it is, go outside and enjoy it. Because God knows when it might snow again. I'm just kidding, but you never know. All right. Take care. Lead powerfully. change the world. Bye.